For most of my 52 years, I had been a woman who moved with my city's ancient rhythms. I had married young, raised my two daughters within the water-lapped walls of our ancestral palazzo, and stayed loyal to my husband, Corrado, through every high tide and low. I believed in routines, in dignity, and in quietly loving the life I had built, even as its gilded edges tarnished and its scope narrowed with time. To me, love was the steady, lapping water against stone, not thrilling, not new, just constant. But then, something happened, something I still can't fully moor in my mind. It wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. And yet, it left me questioning the very foundations of the life I thought I knew, the woman I thought I'd always be. I never thought something like this could happen to me. Welcome to Heartstrings and Scars, where we unravel the untold stories of love, betrayal, and the life-changing lessons they leave behind. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. We promise you stories that will make you reflect, question, and maybe even see yourself in the characters we share. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where a damp, gray Sirocco wind presses down on the lagoon, making the air heavy and time feel thick as silt. The public vaporetto service was on a wildcat strike, the third that month, and Corrado was tied up in meetings at the Doge's palace all afternoon. So, when his colleague Lorenzo offered me a ride home from the market in his car, I accepted without thinking twice. I knew Lorenzo from the few art gallery openings I had attended over the years. He was younger than Corrado, maybe in his late 30s, with a calm, assured way of speaking. He always seemed polite, respectful, the kind of man who waited for you to step onto the dock first and looked you in the eye when he asked how you were. And while I never gave it much thought before, I always noticed how his attention lingered, not inappropriately, just longer than most. We made small talk on the crowded pier. He insisted on taking my heavy market bags, filled with produce and fresh fish. "Are you sure this isn't out of your way?" I asked, settling onto the plush leather seat. "Not at all," he smiled. "My apartment is just one canal past yours. It gives me a good excuse to escape the office early." His voice had a certain softness to it, warm, unhurried. It made me feel oddly safe, a feeling I rarely had in the presence of other men. With Corrado, everything had become transactional, renovation bills, menu plans, reminding him about the boat maintenance. I didn't resent him for it. That's just what marriage becomes after 30 years, isn't it? A shared, predictable current. As we pulled away from the dock, the sun broke through the clouds for a brief, glorious moment. It ignited the Grand Canal, turning the water to molten gold and splashing across the polished mahogany dashboard. I saw Lorenzo glance sideways at me, his hand relaxed on the throttle. "You seem quiet," he said. I shrugged my gaze. "It's just been one of those days. You know how it is." He didn't press, just nodded, his eyes back on the waterway. But something about his presence filled the small cabin in a way that was hard to ignore. Not romantic, just present listening. We talked about the usual things, the tourist traffic, the humid weather, a new glassblower in Murano. I found myself laughing more than I expected, especially when he told me a story about Corrado trying to negotiate with a stubborn seagull that had stolen his sandwich. "He didn't mention that part," I said, wiping a tear of laughter from the corner of my eye. "He probably left out the part where he blamed it on the tourists," Lorenzo added, grinning. I laughed again, then let the moment quiet down. Then we came to a stop at a narrow intersection, waiting for a train to pass. We idled in silence for a few moments, the boat rocking gently. Something about that stillness felt different, like the moment had taken a breath of its own. Lorenzo turned to me, not dramatically, not like in a film, but just enough to meet my eyes. "May I ask you something, Livia?" I nodded, unsure why the rhythmic thump of the engine suddenly felt like my own pulse. "Do you ever wonder if you're still seen?" The question hit me in a place I hadn't visited in a long, long time, a deep, silent chamber of my heart. "Seen?" I repeated softly. He nodded again. "I mean, as more than someone's wife, someone's mother, just you." I looked away, toward the moss-slicked wall of a passing building, trying to keep my voice steady. "All the time," I said. The last gondola drifted by, its striped pole disappearing around a corner, but we didn't move right away. He waited a beat, as if giving me space to say more. We didn't speak for a few minutes, but my thoughts were racing. The ride continued, but it wasn't the kind of silence that begged to be filled. It felt more like something was unfolding between us, a map to a place I'd forgotten existed. Cautiously, I sat with my hands folded over my purse, staring out at the passing water gates and shuttered windows. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. What Lorenzo had asked me lingered in my mind like a dropped stone, its ripples spreading through the still water of my soul. It was the first time in years someone had looked at me and not just seen Corrado's wife, the woman who organized the annual regatta party. He turned into my street and parked. He didn't stop the engine, just idled there. "Livia," he said, his voice quiet but certain, "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I hope I didn't." "You didn't," I replied quickly. "It's just, no one's asked me something like that in a long time." He looked over at me then, really looked, and I felt like I had to do something with my hands, with my eyes. Anything to anchor myself. "I've seen the way you carry yourself," he said. "There's something in you that's still very alive, but I get the sense you've been told to keep it tucked away." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Not embarrassment, but a flush of awareness of being spoken to in a language my soul hadn't heard in years. I didn't know what to say, so I just reached for the door. But before I could open it, he said, "If it's okay, could I walk you a bit?" I hesitated. The rational part of me, the one that paid the palazzo's upkeep and haggled at the fish market, screamed, no. But another part of me, quieter but more insistent, said, yes. I nodded. Of course. We walked through the damp, echoing ground floor androne, our footsteps loud on the stone. The air smelled of brine and old plaster. I fished in my bag for the keys, the tension stretching like a fine silk thread between us, not tight, not uncomfortable, just fragile. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line back there," he said, standing a step behind me. "You didn't," I said again, turning to face him at the foot of the grand staircase. "It's just hard to know what to do with a moment like that." He nodded, hands in his pockets. I think sometimes moments happen just to remind us we're still human, still capable of feeling things. There it was again. That calm honesty. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching a little. He looked at me a moment longer, then smiled gently. "Have a good evening, Livia." "You too, Lorenzo." He turned and walked back toward his car, his footsteps echoing, and then fading. I stood there for a moment with the key in my hand. My world had quietly shifted. When I stepped inside our apartment, the air was dim and cool with the scent of beeswax and old wood. I set my purse on a marble-top table and just stood there, listening to the stillness. No lines had been crossed, no kisses stolen, and yet something had happened. Something I felt in the tightness of my chest and the ache in my hands. Lorenzo had seen me, and now I couldn't unsee myself. The days that followed felt strange. When I walked past a Murano glass mirror, when I poured my morning espresso, I kept hearing his question echo. "Do you ever wonder if you're still seen?" It haunted me in the gentlest way. Corrado didn't notice. We had drifted into that stage of marriage where silence wasn't awkward. It was just the water we swam in. He'd ask about the roofer. I'd ask about mooring fees. I didn't resent him, but there was a growing sense inside me that I had started disappearing. First slowly, then all at once. 2 days later, my phone beeped. A text, "Livia, I'm headed out for coffee in a bit if you'd like to join." I stared at the message. I could have ignored it. Should have, maybe, but I didn't. Me? Where? We met at a small cafe tucked into a quiet campo. I got there early and chose a table in the back. When he arrived, he slid into the seat across from me with a quiet smile. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't," I said truthfully, stirring my black coffee. "I know." There was that thoughtful silence again. "I've been thinking about what you said," I finally admitted, "about being seen." I paused. I guess I didn't realize how much I missed it. Not attention, but just someone noticing. He nodded. We spend so much time taking care of the history around us that we forget to check in with the history inside us. It's easy to get lost. "I think I got lost a while ago," I said quietly. "I don't want to complicate your life, Livia," he said, his tone gentle but direct. I enjoy talking to you, that's all." And it was the sincerity in his voice that undid me. We talked for nearly an hour. I told him I used dance alone on the cold terrazzo floors when the girls were little, just to feel alive. He smiled like that was the most beautiful thing he'd heard all week. When we stood to leave, he held the door for me. As I stepped out into the bright light of the campo, he said, "Livia, if you ever need to talk or just breathe differently for a while, I'm here." I nodded, holding his gaze for a heartbeat too long. "Thank you." That night, as I lay in bed next to Corrado, his back turned to me, I felt something stir inside me. Not guilt, not regret, just awareness. Something had changed. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure what came next. A week passed. I didn't hear from Lorenzo, and I didn't reach out. I needed space to understand what was happening inside me. It wasn't about him. Not really. It was about me. Who had I become? One evening, after Corrado had gone to his study, I stayed in the kitchen, wiping the same clean marble counter. My reflection in the dark window stared back at me. Older, softer, but still here. I thought of the woman I was years ago, the one who painted with watercolors and read poetry by candlelight. That woman hadn't vanished. She was just dormant. And somehow, a single question from a man I barely knew had cracked the shell I had built around her. That night, I told Corrado we needed to talk. We sat at the heavy dining room table. I looked at him, really looked at the man I had built a life with. "I've been feeling invisible," I said. He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I don't think you really see me anymore. And I don't think I've let you." He sat back, folding his arms. "Where is this coming from?" I chose my words carefully, from a place inside me that's been quiet for too long. I didn't tell him about Lorenzo, because this wasn't about another man. This was about me. He looked down, rubbing his jaw. "I guess I just thought we were comfortable." "We are," I said, "but I want more than comfortable. I want to feel alive again." For a long time, the only sound was the distant chime of a church bell. But for the first time in years, we were truly there together. Eventually, he said, "What do you need from me?" "I don't know yet," I whispered, "but I need to start finding out." The next morning, I went for a walk. No makeup, no destination. My feet stopped on their own outside the little cafe in the quiet campo. I stood for a moment, then walked inside. Lorenzo wasn't there, and strangely, I was okay with that. I ordered my espresso and took a seat by the window. I pulled out a leather-bound notebook I hadn't used in years. The pages were blank, but it felt like a beginning. Not of something reckless or forbidden, but something necessary. I didn't need saving. I didn't need romance or rescue. I just needed to remember that I was still here, that I was still worth seeing. And as I sipped my coffee and put pen to the clean, white page, I realized something else too. I had already started seeing myself again.